So thank you for inviting me to talk to this esteemed group of folks, of parents here, of the students at Stanford. And I may have taught some of your students. I may be teaching them right now. I'm teaching exercise physiology on campus right now. So let me go ahead and share my screen. And okay. All right. So I'm going to be talking today about physical activity for longevity, and with a special emphasis on why it's so challenging in this modern world. And before I start with that, I'd like to just reference the fact that I'm the assistant director of Stanford Lifestyle Medicine, which is a relatively new program here on campus. And we have 7 pillars of lifestyle medicine. And one of the goals is to translate scientific information into actionable items, actionable information that people can use right away. And so with that in mind, oh, and by the way, you can sign up for our newsletters. We have a lot of information about the 7 pillars. This next newsletter coming out next week is about reflection and gratitude. But with this sort of background in mind, I'm going to use science not to barrage you with information, but hopefully to lead you to some very practical tips that you can integrate into your life starting today. And that's whether you're currently active or not. So I'd like to start off by just pointing out that 85 years old can look very different. So you can look like this gentleman here who's in a nursing home and dependent on others for his activities of daily living. Or you can look like Alma Kent here, pictured running the London Marathon at age 85. And if I were to ask you, who you'd rather be like when you're 85, I'm sure you'd say Alma, out there smiling, doing her thing, running a marathon. And there are certain things that are beyond your control, certain things around genetics, around injuries, certain diseases, but there are a lot of things in your control that you can direct your trajectory of aging sort of away from this gentleman and towards Alma. And we call that healthy aging. And there are a lot of things that you can focus on, but of course, as an exercise physiologist, I'm going to be talking about physical activity today. And when you look at the literature on aging, it can appear pretty grim. So here we have aging, you fall in endurance and a fall in strength and function, and physical activity falls. There's a genetic component, energy expenditures down, weight gain goes up, and then you're at a risk for all of these metabolic diseases and for a fall in cognitive function. So, that doesn't look like a very good trajectory, but I look at this figure with great optimism, because right in the center of all of that is physical activity. So if you can flip that one arrow, that physical activity, then all the other arrows change as well. So your endurance, strength, and function will not fall as much, and they can even increase at any age. Energy expenditure goes up. The disease risk for all of these different things goes down with increasing physical activity, and your cognitive function can improve as well. So I think there's a great deal of optimism in that figure. So I know this is a little hard to do remotely, but I want you to just for 30 seconds, 15 to 30 seconds, get out of your chair right now and just move around. And I want you to, as you're moving and trying to get your heart rate up, I want you to think about what's changing within your body. So, what do you feel changing as you're moving around? You can do dramatic things, you can do little things, you can do some squats. And I have you timed here, so just keep going for a while. Those of you with the camera off are just staring at me like, she's insane. I'm not getting out of my chair. Maybe 10 more seconds. Good. This is going to wake you up for the rest of the talk. Okay, thank you. You can come back to your chair. So, in a live setting, I would then ask, so what do you feel is changing in your body? And there are a lot of things that people cite that they know. You've been around a long time. You felt this in your body when you're running to catch the bus or going up the stairs. So people say increase in heart rate, blood flow, breathing, blood pressure, increase in sweating, body temperature, and metabolism. So burning more calories. And that is all true. And those are all the things that we just experience in our daily lives. But there's a whole nother layer to this that's a little less obvious, that you start to learn when you learn exercise physiology or you study the human body. And that's changes in hormones and neurological signaling. Mitochondria, those powerhouses in your cell, are activated and improved. Mobilization of the fat, increased brain function, and basically the start of an adaptive process that's going to prepare your body for more movement later on. And that adaptive process will lead to all of these different changes in your body. So we know that physical activity done repeatedly can increase muscle strength. It can change the risk for cancer. Your microbiome changes, bone health, functional capacity, all these different things, many of which you've probably heard before. And then there's the brain component, the impact on cognitive function, reduction in the progression of Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's, changes in mood and memory, and then all the way down into the cells. So the impact on cellular aging per se. And there are these 12 hallmarks of aging that people have tried to sort of characterize of what it means to age. And physical activity can impact all of those, either indirectly or directly. And so it's a very powerful medicine that you have at your fingertips. So how are all these things connected? It's so strange to me to think that, moving my leg, going for a run, going for a walk, all of that could impact these disease risks and brain function. How is your leg connected to your brain? Well, over the last several years, actually a couple decades now, we've understood that muscles actually act as pharmacies. So they release these protein substances, these hormones, these myokines, and there are a lot of them that are released throughout the day, but in particular released in response to physical activity. We call those exerkines. And depending on what species you look at or what you count as a myokine, there are between 650 and 3,000 of these. And we only understand a small portion of it. But what it means is your body is sort of monitoring you. It's sort of, it's like Santa at Christmas. Have you been naughty or nice? Have you been moving or not? And it's going to respond accordingly and reward you with lovely presents at Christmas. And this is just, believe it or not, is a simplification of sort of the myokine process. And the details are not important here. But what I think is important is just this understanding that as you're contracting these muscles, no matter where they are in your body, you're releasing all of these substances that impact the muscle themselves, brain, visceral fat, adipose. This is behind the screen, I can't see it, but adrenal glands, gastrointestinal tract, the pancreas, liver, bone, vessels, even your skin. So these things are signaling during exercise and having an impact on these diverse things within your body. And one of the mechanisms by which these myokines work is by tamping down chronic inflammation. So many of you may have heard that, beware of the chronic inflammation. It leads to metabolic syndrome and type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and that's all true. And that excess body fat, especially in the abdomen or the visceral fat, releases these pro-inflammatory adipokines. But muscle activity releases these myokines that block that metabolic disease. And they block what's being released from your visceral adipose tissue as well. So even if you're exercising and you're not losing weight, and some people have that as the goal, but you should know that just the movement per se, regardless of body composition, will improve your disease risk profile. So it'll reduce your risk for metabolic disease because it's influencing things in this pathway and stamping down that chronic inflammation. So I think most of you on this call, all of you probably kind of knew that, right? We know that exercise is good for us. Everybody feels like, oh, I should be doing more, or many people feel like I should be doing more. So why is it so hard? Well, there's this very interesting transition that someone named Daniel Lieberman, who is a paleoanthropologist at Harvard, discussed. And he was in this book, Born to Run. Some of you may have read that. And he said, we were born to run. We are the ultimate endurance athletes. We could run down our prey and they'd eventually keel over from heat stroke and bonk them on their head. And that was dinner. And so we are this endurance animal. But he transitioned that over a number of years. And in his most recent book, Exercise, he really said, actually, no, we're born to survive by expending as little energy as possible. So you'd never see, a hunter-gatherer going out for a jog. Just, I think I'm going to go running right now, because that's extra calories they have to capture and supply, right? So their movement is built into their lifestyle. And that's how they expend their calories. You have the ability to run down the animals and get them, but it's not what you do just for fun. And so we carry that evolutionary feeling, that desire to conserve energy with us in this modern world. And it's fine when you're having to go and hunt, run down your fuel. But if you can go to grocery store 24/7 and get these very high calorically dense foods without, in the car, or have them delivered to your house, you're not expending that daily activity. And we've essentially engineered physical activity out of our lives. So we have screens, we have cars, we have escalators, washing machines. We don't even go to the mall anymore and walk around. We have Amazon delivered, which I love, by the way. But all of those things just engineer a little bit more movement out of our lives. And it's only getting worse. So here's a quote I got a number of years ago now, but if you're making the customer do any amount of extra work, no matter what industry you call home, you're now a target for disruption. So people are looking for the easier solution, right? The delivery of groceries, there's all sorts of things online, automatic sliding pet doors, which is great. I have a dog, but the testimonials are so funny because, it's like Kevin S. I never have to get off the couch again. Yay! So we're appreciating not having to move. And even the cats are taking the easy way to travel around the house, riding the Roombas or the Zumbas or whatever that is. And then in our work, we have, we're not moving around anymore. So in an agrarian society like the Amish, their work movement is about 48 hours per week. But the modern office worker is about 2.7 hours per week. And now that many of us are working from home and Zooming from home, that number drops even more during the pandemic and after. So we have developed this concept of exercise, this modern construct that we need because we have removed physical activity from our lives. So we go to gyms, we go to soul cycling, we have Pelotons, we have these times when we exercise. And I used to go to a gym pre-pandemic with a friend of mine who would drive around and circle and circle and circle to get a parking place close to the gym so that she could go in and walk on the treadmill. And I was like, why don't you just park farther away and walk there? But I kind of get it. Like, we have this exercise time and we have this lifetime, and we've separated those two things, and our health and the planet would probably be a lot better if we were able to unite those a little bit more. And so here are the physical activity guidelines. This is sort of a paraphrasing of them, and many of you may be familiar with these, but basically do some type of cardio aerobic activity, 150 to 300 minutes, moderate intensity a week. The more intense it is, the less you need. You can break it up into shorter sessions. You should be doing resistance exercise, flexibility exercise, neuromotor exercise. They're working on balance, agility, gait, and then avoid sitting whenever possible. And these are great. These are supported by decades and decades of research that suggests that if you can meet these guidelines, you're optimizing your long-term health. But the problem is that very few people actually do them. So only about 20% of the US adult population meets the guidelines fully for physical activity. And, it gets back to that, the conflicts of time and our ability to be more or desire to be more sedentary, and a lot of other factors that I won't go into at this time. You probably have your own barriers. So what I'm going to do today is divide up physical activity into 3 general categories, and then give you at least one tip for each of these that will help you in those categories, right? And I'll give you the science behind it. So this is going to be valid for people who are exercising a lot already and want to add some elements, or people who are just really trying to get up and do something. So the 3 categories are endurance activities, so running, biking, hiking, and this impacts your cardiovascular fitness. Resistance training, sometimes called weight training, or strength training, so develop strength and power. And then lifestyle activities, so those things that we've really engineered out of our lives, so walking, chores, taking stairs, etc. All right, so first one, the aerobic capacity. So there's something called your VO2 max, your maximal oxygen consumption. And it's considered the gold standard for cardiovascular fitness because it takes into account your ability to breathe, to get the oxygen into your lungs, for it to fuse into your blood, to saturate your hemoglobin, to go through your heart and down into your tissues to extract that oxygen, and then the mitochondria to actually use that oxygen. So if you can optimize these pathways, your VO2 max goes up, and your ability to do work goes up, right? So because you can consume more oxygen, you can do more work. And that can be, walking upstairs or running a marathon or whatever it is. You increase your aerobic capacity. And this figure here shows what happens to VO2 max across the lifespan. So this is actually a cross-sectional study looking at endurance-trained women and sedentary women. And the first thing you notice is the curves go down, right? So over the lifespan, VO2 max falls. So age is a factor, but it's not the only factor, because look at this 75-year-old has a VO2 max that's higher than this sedentary 30-year-old, right? So there are other components involved, and physical training is a major one of those. And if you're sort of thinking about who will notice this change first, well, the endurance trained people will, because they're out there, they're running, they're training, it's hard, they can't quite match the same times, they're noticing a difference. This sedentary group is not really paying attention, right? So their capacity is going down, but they don't notice perhaps as much. And that's critical, because there's this threshold of disability below which people can no longer take care of themselves. They can't pick up a bag of groceries and walk. They can't go up the stairs. They can't get off the toilet. And that threshold is about 18. Well, it doesn't really matter what the number is. But the point is that this endurance trained group never crosses that threshold, even up to age 75, whereas a number of the sedentary people cross that threshold in their 60s. And so by doing physical activity, you can stay above that threshold of disability. And so cardio training can include running, biking, swimming, etc., even brisk walking. And my tip number one in this category is that intensity matters. So you want to, if you're out walking or running, even if it's just a short, brief period, you want to keep pushing a little bit. You want to get out of your comfort zone. It's really easy not to want to do that, but you want to keep that maximum capacity up. So if you think of your endurance, your aerobic capacity as a triangle, and the foundation below here comes from sort of slow, steady movement. Pushing yourself with a little bit higher intensity on occasion will keep that VO2 max higher. And that means everything that you do underneath it will feel easier, right? So it'll be a lower relative percentage of your maximum. And so you need to sort of keep that in mind as you're deciding what to do. And a very time-efficient way of doing that is high-intensity interval training. So that involves, doing something hard and then slowing down, and then hard and then slowing down. And we've found in the last decade or so all sorts of benefits from that in a very efficient way. So you can increase your VO2 max, you can increase your endurance, the powerhouse in your cell, the mitochondria, improves a variety of health parameters. And people find it more enjoyable than long-term exercise in some cases. And there are many different ways to do it. So there are all sorts of studies where, you go 30 at, moderate intensity, 20 at slightly higher, and then 10 all out, or 2 minutes harder and 4 minutes off, and all these different things. The key is that you are doing intense exercise separated by some recovery time. So you let your metabolic rate drop back down, and then you push it up again. And that transition from low to high energy state has some powerful biochemical impacts on your body. And so that's where a lot of the improvement comes in a very efficient amount of time. So what about muscular fitness and resistance training? Well, this is the one that a lot of people don't really do as they age. But if you look at this graph, similar to the VO2 max, with an untrained person and a weight-trained person, so someone doing resistance training, you can see that the resistance trained person, and these are sort of summary values from the literature, they stay higher, they don't drop as far, and then they fall off towards later life, but they're still well above that threshold of disability and much higher than the untrained person. And again, this is what people they don't integrate as much into their routine as they age. And you can get benefit from resistance training at any age. So here's a study I like to use, not because it's recent, there have been many more since then, but this is the highest mean age group I could find. So frail elderly men and women in a long-term care facility, mean age 90, They did 8 weeks of high intensity resistance training. They increased their quadriceps strength by 174%. They increased their mid-thigh muscle area. So they actually had an increase in muscle size, increased their gait speed, stair climbing, power, balance. And then there's this increase in spontaneous activity level. So as they got more confident and a little bit stronger, they did more things. And you often see that, this spiraling up of physical activity. On the opposite side of that, if there's a fall or an injury, you can get a spiraling down that's sometimes hard to pull yourself back out of. But if you get a little stronger, then people tend to get more active. And so the bottom line is, you're never too old to benefit from exercise, and nothing has proven as effective at reversing muscle loss as resistance training. And it's not just about, looking big or getting stronger, that having more muscle impacts all of these things. So the bone density, the strength, the power, the cognitive function, better weight maintenance, because muscle mass is a very metabolically active tissue. So if you can maintain more muscle mass, you're burning more calories 24/7. Decreased chronic disease risk. So this is emerging as a way of really addressing the systemic disease risk that we have in our population. And increased longevity. So you have decreased mortality if you remain stronger and better functional capacity. So my tips for resistance training are 2A, just do it, right? It is sometimes challenging to integrate it into your life. And I think that's why people don't do it. They also don't understand how important it is. So as we age, the balance, the need to really maintain that muscle mass and to work at it becomes stronger. So, I've been an athlete all my life, and I, used to run and play soccer and all these things. And I was just sort of naturally strong because of that. But I find now that as I'm aging, I really have to focus on that to keep up my muscle strength. You have to be more intentional about it. And so I have a boot camp routine I do from home, with a piece of paper, takes 30 minutes, done, and I strengthen a variety of muscle groups as I do it. So it doesn't have to be complicated. You've heard about, you lift at this percent of your maximum and this many reps and whatever. Really doing anything more than you're doing now will build strength. So you can do body weight exercises, you can do, squats, you can lift, milk cartons, whatever it is. If you're providing a resistance to your muscles, they will adapt. And there was even this study that came out that was written up in the New York Times last year that 3 seconds of maximal voluntary contraction per day. So you tighten all your muscles as much as you can for 3 seconds. That increased strength by up to 12%. So very small time commitment for a big benefit. And some of that comes from just teaching your brain to re-engage those muscles that you already have. Functional training and compound movements are good. So if you're doing, rather than just do a biceps curls, if you're doing a pull-up or a squat, you're getting multiple muscle groups at once. And again, every once in a while, doing some heavier weights to engage that neural signaling is useful, but you can also do light weights and you'll have a great deal of benefit from that. And if you push yourself to the point where it's hard for you to go on, you're going to get a bigger effect. So close to failure, the more effective it will get. And if you want to look up, how to get started, you can look up terms like functional fitness or compound movements, and that'll give you some ideas of things that you can do. And then I don't want to forget about the lifestyle activities. So I think this is critical, and it's a really important way for people to make sure that they can maintain their health and longevity. So the little things can make a difference, even if you exercise regularly. So what do I mean by that? Well, lifestyle activity, this is tip 3A, is a place to start if you're struggling with physical activity. Because you have those guidelines, but do you really need those full guidelines for health benefits? And if you look at the literature, looking at the relationship between leisure time physical activity and the hazards ratio for mortality, so the risk of dying from any cause, you can see that the steep part of the curve is down here on the low end of movement, right? So here are your guidelines in the middle. And at the high end of the guidelines, you've really reached that plateau. You're optimizing the benefit you can get from physical activity. But if you don't do anything, just doing a little something, like 3 MET hours per week, and I'll describe what those are in just a moment, you can drop your risk of mortality by 20%. Right? So this is the steep area of the curve. And it's really important because if you look at the data of people who are doing no leisure time physical activity, as of 2010, and I don't have an update on this now, but about 50% of the population, so these are women, these are men, this is the percentage doing no leisure time physical activity. So about 50% of the population does nothing, and that's up from about 15% in 1988. So again, engineering that movement out of our lives. So here's a particular study that looked at that issue, from which that summary graph from Health and Human Services was taken, one of the studies they used. This is the straight curve, right? So you can see how steep it is at this end, and this is a logarithmic curve, so it flattens the curve out a little bit. This is over 15,000 men and women from 39 countries. And then if this first drop to about, a drop of 30% in all-cause mortality, up at about 5 MET hours per week. So what does that mean? Well, a MET is an increase in metabolic rate. So all of you sitting right there, your metabolic rate is close to resting. So it might be like 1, 1.2, 1.3. And every increment above that is a MET. So then MET hours is how many hours you have that metabolic rate above resting. And here are some numbers for you. So walking briskly, 3.3 MET hours. Actually, you can see this here. What does it say? Yeah, 3.3 MET hours at 3 miles per hour. Heavy gardening is 4. So let's look at the walking briskly. So to get to 5, and this is actually 0 to 5, but to get to 5 MET hours per week, that would mean walking maybe 70 minutes a week. So 10 to 15 minutes a day, and you drop your all-cause mortality by 30%. That's pretty powerful, right? If you're doing nothing and just adding that in, that's powerful. And then anything above that is a bonus. Then you get on the steeper part of the curve here, and eventually will flatten out. So just integrating these movements, making little decisions throughout your life to walk to the store or the coffee shop instead of driving, can have an impact on your overall health. And we see this in the blue zone. Some of you may have seen the Blue Zones documentary, but these are regions around the world where they have long-lived populations. And they've tried to analyze what it is about those populations. There's probably some genetic component as well, but they've come up with 9 elements here. And the first one is move naturally. So make daily physical activity an unavoidable part of your environment. And here, the quote from the paper: move naturally. The world's longest lived people do not pump iron, run marathons, or join gyms. Instead, they live in environments that constantly nudge them into moving without thinking about it. They grow gardens and do not have mechanical conveniences for house and yard work. And then these other things are also important. This red wine thing is a little bit out of favor now, but still on the list. And here's a study that just came out a couple months ago, looking at the number of steps you need to really benefit your health. And this is again, all-cause mortality and cardiovascular disease. And you can see that the steep part of the curve is down here. So for a minimum for benefit is 2,600 steps. Optimal is greater than 8,000, so walking about 4 miles. And over here, you see there's no difference between men and women, but any additional intensity or increase in pace that you can add further increases the health benefit. So trying to step it up and walk a little bit more briskly is also helpful. Okay, so lifestyle activity tip 3B, for those who are already exercising regularly. First of all, fantastic, keep it up, you're awesome. You're getting a lot of health benefit from that. But second, don't rest on your laurels. So that can be throughout your life. So if you're, an athlete at Stanford or a college athlete, high school athlete, whatever, and now you're taking it a little bit easier, it really matters more what you're doing now than what you were doing then. Okay, so you got to keep up that activity throughout your life. But it also applies throughout the day. So there's this relationship between sitting and movement that's represented in this Health and Human Services graph. And what it says is, if the guidelines for moderate physical activity are right here, let's say you're meeting those guidelines, but you are sitting throughout the day, the rest of the day, you start to lose a little of that benefit, right? So you start to get in this yellow area or the orange area. And if you're very sedentary, then sitting, I mean, if you're not doing outside activity, then sitting, it can be even worse for you, right? If you're up here and you're, still a mastered athlete and you're exercising a lot throughout the day, then there's probably not as much time for sitting, and that activity will sort of override that. But you still want to be interrupting your sitting when possible, because there's new data to suggest that even for those masters athletes, although you're getting enough health benefit, you're minimizing the ability of the adaptation process to respond to your exercise. So by getting up throughout the day, you actually enhance the impact that training is having on your body. So what is the issue with sitting? Well, you're not processing lipids when you're sitting in a totally relaxed state. So when I'm standing here in front of the computer, sort of moving around, I'm using my postural muscles, my quads, my calves, and the red muscles, the postural, the sort of low intensity muscles, are processing fuels in a way that they don't if I'm just sitting completely sedentary. So that impacts your health. You can develop insulin resistance after sitting without moving, not full insulin resistance, but you can lose some of the sensitivity after just 4 hours of sitting continuously. You burn fewer calories, your muscles drop into this super relaxed state that drops your energy consumption. And then I mentioned you have this resistance to exercise training effects. And biomechanically, you can get leg edema, spine compression, etc., if you're sitting for long periods of time. So getting out of your chair is very helpful. And remember that not all sitting's the same. So this is often how we sit. I find myself doing this all this time, leaning back, on the computer, head resting back and really only moving my finger muscles, versus sitting like this, like the Hadza in Tanzania. They also sit for long periods of time, but they sit without chairs, right? They're squatting, they're using their leg muscles, they're digging, they're doing things. And so they're constantly using these small muscles to burn calories and keep their metabolic rate up. So solutions to this: sit less, sit differently. So you can sit away from the back of your chair, so at least you're using your postural muscles. You can have a standing desk, a treadmill desk. You can try one of these Swiss balls, although there are some issues with that as well. But there you're kind of stabilizing yourself while you're sitting. But the one that has really emerged as being very important is this idea of interrupting your sitting. So taking little movement snacks. So every 30 minutes, moving for 2 minutes. And that can be a walk, you can do squats, stairs, you can climb, chair stands, whatever it is. And just doing that, so not changing the total amount of sitting, but just interrupting it periodically, changes the way your body metabolizes fuels. And so you get all of these benefits: improved glucose disposal, improved insulin sensitivity, better blood lipids, potentially some weight loss, so better body mass index, lower blood pressure, and increased protein synthesis. And so there's this movement now, excuse the pun, there's this movement of movement snacks where people are designing little routines that people can do throughout the day. So rather than going out for a long jog, which would be great if you could do that as well, but just doing small things throughout your day will improve your cardiovascular fitness, drop your blood glucose, and increase vascular health. And if you think about it, these movement snacks could target all of today's tips, right? You could do them intensely, and so you get that aerobic component. You can, you can do the resistance training, so doing squats, etc., and you can interrupt your sitting and incorporate these lifestyle activities. So it's a good way to sort of start off and take all these tips together and try it out. And there are a lot of different things that you can do to interrupt that sitting. There's also a lot of information online that can show you how to do it. And these are 2 examples, but now there's this 7-minute standing workout. So if you're in your office, you don't have to be lying on the ground doing planks or something. You can actually just do it from a standing position. And you can look that up, and you could do like 3 minutes on one break and then 4 minutes on another, or something like that, or other push-ups on your desk, whatever it is, just integrate. Just think about integrating movement back into your life. So a review of today's tips. Intensity matters. So think about just pushing yourself out of the comfort zone periodically. It'll get easier to do that, and it might even feel good, and you'll feel a great reward afterwards, and it'll be a great reward for your health. Tip number 2, so do the resistance training. Find something that works for you, whether it's, body exercises at home, or going to the gym, or, carrying objects, or whatever it is. Try and push those muscles so that you can increase your strength. And then whether you're active or not, intermittent movement throughout the day is important for your health. So the bottom line is you have this powerful tool of physical activity that can positively affect almost every element of your health and can change the trajectory of your aging. And so if you think of your lifespan and your function, so you can put really anything over on this axis. It can be muscle strength, it can be cognitive function, it can be aerobic capacity. There's this development during childhood, and then the peak happens somewhere around 28, 30, something like that. There's a slight decline throughout the lifespan, and then a more accelerated decline at later years. And sometimes that crosses the threshold of disability. If you are active all your life, then your peak is going to be higher, and that trajectory will be less steep. And so even in your later years, you can live that and not cross that threshold of disability. So you can maintain your independence, you can be playing with your grandkids, you can be out doing the adventures you want to do. And the key is that even if you've never exercised before, you can bump that curve up, right? So even if you're starting now for the first time, you can increase your physical capacity in all of these areas so that you don't cross over that threshold of disability. So in summary, your body is watching you. To function optimally, you want to move regularly throughout the day, do it with others, go outside, play whenever possible. That helps your mental health as well. And that, remember, a convenient life is not necessarily a healthy life. So, if you should be making these decisions throughout your life to make your life a little more difficult, to take the stairs, to walk farther. And people make it seem like that's trivial, but it's really not. It can impact your overall health. So that's all I have for you. There are 2 online classes under edX, which is a Stanford online platform, that are free. If you search for my name, one of them is using exercise physiology to slow aging, and you can just take that class for free and poke around and get more information like this if you're interested. And then the other thing is that, I recommend that you maybe sign up for the Stanford Lifestyle Medicine newsletters. You can just go to Stanford Lifestyle Medicine. There's a button there that says right on the front page, sign up for the newsletter, and sort of see what information we have in these 7 pillars that might help you on your quest for healthier aging and longevity. So with that, I will stop the share and open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was, I can see the passion that comes through what you're doing. You're standing and talking, which is even better. Much of what you said is so obvious, and I know you backed it up with a lot of scientific evidence and whatever, but we all know it, and yet so few people do it. Why is that? Why is it more people are not able to do it?
So I think that part of it is that we're just wired to conserve energy. So it's not something that we do naturally, that many people do naturally. And then, we have just engineered movement out of our lives, and we have all these barriers to fitting it back in. So whether it's time, you're working at your job, you have to go pick up the kids, you have to go do this errand. And you get home from a long day of work and you're tired, and then to try and get out there and do it is really challenging. And so finding something that works for you, it has to be something that works for you. I mean, the most important exercise is the one that you're going to do, right? So it doesn't really matter what we say. You just got to pick something that will work for you. and trying to find some type of prompt that reminds you to go out and do it, whether it's putting your, shoes by the door in the morning, or, I got a puppy, so now I have to go out every morning and take the puppy out before I go to work. Little things like that. I mean, I wouldn't suggest getting a puppy just so you exercise, because it's a freaking lot of work, but it does, those types of things do prompt you to move and to get that movement back into your life.
Yeah, I was also surprised at how so little can do so much. I mean, it's like such a big drop for so little work. So I think that's something that everyone can do, and it's very easy. There's one question from one of our parents. She says, 85-year-old mother walks 10,000 steps a day, which is amazing, but a doctor advises against it. Um, and because she has some soreness in the legs, so should she listen to the doctor, or should she continue?
Well, you're putting me in a slightly awkward position. So
Yeah.
um, I don't know the full story, and so I don't know where those recommendations are coming from. However, I would, from an exercise physiologist point of view, recommend that she continue with those 10,000 steps. I really think that's the best thing that she can do. And if she's suffering from a little bit of osteoarthritis, the physical activity has actually been shown to reduce the pain in the long run. Like, it's hard to overcome that discomfort, but it would be worse if she weren't doing that movement, because then the joints will stiffen up more. And walking doesn't generally add to the progression of the disease. Like, higher impact work might, once the disease has started, but it's sort of a myth out there that running causes osteoarthritis. There are other things. Like, once you start down that path and you're in an inflammatory process, high impacts can make it worse. But actually, people who run are less likely, recreationally at least, not competitively, are less likely to get osteoarthritis than those that don't. So I don't know what the full story is, but I think that movement in any capacity that you can do it, like if you're in a wheelchair doing upper body movement, whatever, any capacity will increase your health and longevity. So that's my biased opinion.
Yes. So there's a question from Bob Gutzman. He says he recalls you talking a while ago in a edX class about how she was able to bounce back from an Achilles tendon tear significantly faster than normal by doing exercise and taking what is this, collagen? Is there any recent research that confirms regular exercise helps with bouncing back from an injury faster?
Yes. So, yeah, I mean, if you think back to, 1950s, when people had a heart attack, they were put on bed rest. Now, when people have a heart attack, they're put into rehab movement exercises, the next day. And the same is true for any kind of injury or surgery. I mean, once you get past, as long as you're not going to be, increasing the damage. So if the swelling is really great, you have to wait till the swelling goes down, things like that. But like when I had my Achilles surgery, and it's amazing that you remember that, I was in the PT office the next morning, and they took off my boot and had me start to move, right? So you move as much as you can. And then I continued that on a 8-hour cycle. So every 8 hours I'd take off the boot and move, because the loading cycle, the protein synthesis cycle for collagen is 8 hours. So I'd give it a little bit of stimulus as much as I could do. I was doing some other experimental things as well, not drug related or anything, but just working the upper body as much as I could to increase growth hormone and things like that. But I did cut my recovery time substantially. And so I think there's quite a bit of evidence now that getting people moving afterwards and preventing the muscle wasting that often comes with an injury can enhance people's ability to get back to it afterwards. That's done appropriately with, guidance.
Okay, here's another one. So, you talked about 2 minutes per 30 minutes of just getting away and breaking it up. How many times a day? Every 30 minutes?
If you can, that would be ideal. People often shoot initially for at least 3 times throughout their sitting day. So ideally, you would do it every 30 minutes throughout the day. And, once you get it into your routine, you can do that. It's tough when you're in an hour-long meeting, right? But although people are starting to get more understanding about standing in the back in the meeting or standing up periodically. I teach an hour and a half class here on campus, and in the middle of every class, we do some kind of movement exercise. We get up and we do jumping jacks, or I have a dance video or something, because I want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. Not everyone has that much focus on it. But yeah, if you can, every 30 minutes, otherwise the best you can do, right? So every little bit helps. So there's not some threshold that if you don't meet it, you shouldn't do it at all. Every little bit helps. So do what you can do.
Right. And there's another question. What is your opinion of Mito Q for recovery of muscle from exercise and longevity?
Mito Q.
Yeah, it is mitochondrial something.
Oh, coenzyme Q.
Yeah,
Uh,
CoQ10, I think it is.
oh, Q10. Yeah. I'm not actually a big supplement person. So I think that unless you're in, my personal opinion is that unless you're in that top elite percentage where you're competing and you need that 1 to 2%, that most of these supplements are not hugely beneficial, that you could spend just a little bit more time doing things that we know work, like training, making sure you're getting a healthy diet. All of those have impacts, in the range of 10, 20, 30, 40%, whereas these little things that come and go have really not been shown to be terribly effective unless you're maybe in that elite population. But even then, a lot of them are questionable. That's my opinion.
Here's another one. There are many tests being marketed that purport to tell us our biological age. Do you see any value in these tests? And if so, which one would you recommend?
That is an interesting question. So I find them intriguing, but not quite there yet. So I think we don't know enough about what they're showing us. So there's very little data that shows that if you do this, then that clock will change and therefore you're reversing aging. So I am staying tuned, but at this time, I personally would not spend the money to do it. But I think they're interesting, and there's a lot of just very interesting data coming out around them. But I think they're being a little bit over promoted for where they are at this time.
Okay. And is there a certain time of the day which is good for exercise? Or I think you said any time is good, but that is a question.
The time that you're most likely to do it is the best time. So there've been, a lot of studies that say, well, maybe, this time is best, or maybe that time is best. Again, there's small differences, and just making sure that you're doing it is, much better than not doing it. And there are, there's some anabolic windows. So it depends on the kind of exercise. So if you're trying to build muscle, then having a high protein load in the morning to make sure you start the anabolic process can be helpful. I think it matters. There's a recent study that said that exercise in the morning is better, but I've also seen some in the afternoon. So I think it just really depends on what works for you.
And if you are really sore at one point, should you stop for a little bit or continue exercise?
Really sore is sort of a subjective measurement. Oftentimes, if you've worked out and you're sore, if you're doing some type of new routine and you're very sore the next day, it's probably good to maybe wait a day or do something very light where you're just moving the muscles and sort of clearing out some of the damaged materials that's in there, but not a hard core movement. You'll probably be pain limited if you're really sore, but it's all part of the process that leads to building stronger structures in your muscles, which will then allow you to lay down more muscle mass afterwards.
Okay.
So, as you get older, you need more recovery time. Yeah. So it's very easy to bounce back from a heavy workout when you're young. You can probably go back to it the next day. But part of being a master's athlete or trying to stay fit as you age is learning how your body feels and when to give it a break when it needs a break. because this process, this acute phase response where your body adapts, is spread out a little bit more in older adults. And so you need to allow that time in order to be able to push yourself again and not get overtrained. So back on that figure that I showed you with the endurance trained women and the sedentary women and the VO2 max over time, you notice that there was a little bit of a convergence of the lines. I didn't mention that when I was talking about it, but that convergent comes partially because it's just harder to push yourself as hard when you're older as when you're younger. So there's a little bit of relative detraining that's happening. So you're getting the physiologic change, but you're also getting a little bit detraining because you can't maintain those same training levels. And that's part of aging and understanding how your body changes and adapts over time.
So I think we're running out of time, but one last question. Do you include stretching in your routines in addition to cardio and strength training?
So I personally do some stretching, usually after I work out, not before. And I've found, and this has been documented, that you get the connective tissue starts to tighten up as you age, and so stretching becomes more important as we age to make sure that we maintain that full range of motion. So there's controversy on stretching and whether it prevents injuries or not, but I think doing it in order to maintain your range of motion and be able to reach up and get what you want and reach down and get all of that is important. So stretching when your muscles are already warm and maybe doing some dynamic stretching instead of static stretching is helpful.
Thank you so much, Anne. Today, I'm sure it's inspired many of us to make some very quick and easy changes in our lifestyle. I know that I will need to make some in mine. And by the way, you just earned yourself 2 bottles of our priceless Stanford Parents Club jam. So, but thank you again for your time, and we really appreciate you talking to us today.
All right. Thank you all.